From time to time, we see articles about the future. There are various agencies, various governmental think tanks, various so-called think tanks that represent private industry that have as their purpose the prediction of what life is going to be like in the future. Now, their normal approach in this is to try and take present-day trends and project them on out and to look and to see what's going to transpire. So, from time to time, there will be articles coming out that will deal with the American family. What will it be like in the year 2000? Pretty soon, the year 2000 is going to be upon us, 16 years away. That's not very long. That sounds way out far distant. Look back 16 years ago. 16 years ago. When was that? About 1968. That doesn't seem very long ago. Not unless you happen to be 16 or 17, then it seems like a lifetime ago. But most of us look back, and 16 years ago, that's 1968, that was pretty recent. A year like 2000, pretty soon they're going to have to use other benchmarks, dates that sound a little further off, and they'll come up with what is science and industry going to be like? What are we going to have? What's going to be available? Well, a couple of weeks ago, we focused in on what God has to say about our nation, about where some of the current trends are leading, the fact that these trends are not just going to continue on and on and on and on in an uninterrupted fashion on out into the future, that we're not able to really look and see what the future holds simply on the basis of what life is like today, because the great God is going to intervene. He's going to step into history, and man's society is going to be cut short. Now, we focused on that particularly in the relationship of what it portends for this nation, for our people, a couple of weeks ago. And we recognize that Jesus Christ is going to come back to this earth and is going to establish His government here. Yet I wonder how real that concept really is to us. We know it in a general sense, but when we begin to break it down to specifics, how is that going to affect you? What is it really going to be like during the time that God's government holds sway on this earth? How realistic a view do we have? Is Jesus Christ going to simply snap His fingers and presto changeo, a perfect Garden of Eden appears on the earth? In 1 minute you're going to look around and you're going to see disaster everywhere, snap of the finger, and you're going to see a kind of a Garden of Eden type scene. What is it going to be like? Is everyone going to be a farmer? We've read many of the scriptures that talk about dwelling under your own vine and your own fig tree. Is everybody going to be a farmer? Is everybody going to live on a farm? Are there going to be cities in the world tomorrow after Jesus Christ returns to this earth and establishes His government, His rule? Are there going to be any cities? Is there any room for science and technology in tomorrow's world? What about some of those things? What kind of weather are we going to have? Is the whole earth just going to have one climate? What kind of weather will we have? There are various things that I think sometimes we have not really thought of or have not thought specifically through, or sometimes we have thought of them and we simply let our imagination go. Yet God really reveals quite a bit in the Bible about the outline of what is going to transpire and the way that it's going to come about. We need to start by understanding what it is going to be like, the world in which Jesus Christ is going to, the world to which He is going to return. A couple of Sabbaths ago, when we went into the things that are going to transpire in this nation, the prophecies that God says are going to come about, we looked and saw where we stand and that there are things yet to occur. We realized that one of those things involves the destruction and the captivity of the people of modern-day Israel. All right? When we pick up the story in Isaiah chapter 6 and verse 11, "Then said I, Lord, how long? And he answered, Until the cities be wasted without inhabitant, and the houses without man, and the land be utterly desolate. And the Eternal have removed men far away, and there is a great forsaking in the midst of the land, but yet it shall be a tenth, and it shall return. And shall be eaten as a teal tree and as an oak whose substance is in them, and they cast their leaves, so the holy seed shall be the substance thereof." A tenth is to return. Now God brings out basically the same thing in the book of Amos chapter 5 and verse 3, where we're told, "Thus says the Lord God, the city that went out by 1,000 shall leave 100, and that went out by 100 shall leave 10 to the house of Israel." So of those who go into captivity, only a tithe, only 10% are going to survive the captivity, the time of the tribulation, those who actually go into captivity. Now, everyone isn't going to go into captivity. That's brought out very clearly in the book of Ezekiel. Where Ezekiel brings out in Ezekiel chapter 5, verse 12, "A third part of you shall die with a pestilence, and with famine shall they be consumed in the midst of you. A third part shall fall by the sword round about you, and I will scatter a third part into all winds, and will draw out a sword after them." So Ezekiel 5:12 shows that the people of Israel, that as disaster comes on, that a full third of our population is going to die of disease and famine. Another third are going to be killed, or going to be slaughtered in warfare and in an attack that is going to occur. And 1/3 will go into captivity. Now Isaiah and Amos show us that of those 1/3 who go, that 1/3 that go into captivity, only a tithe will remain. Well, if you look at that and just do a little bit of figuring on that, it becomes apparent that we are looking at counting all of the people of Israel, the Israelites of North America and northwestern Europe, that we're looking at perhaps 8 to 10 million people being alive, representing all of the house of Israel, all of the 12 tribes, literally only about 8 to 10 million people being alive when Jesus Christ returns. Out of a population today, a worldwide population of the house of Israel today, approaching close to 300 million. Only a third will have survived to go. 2/3 will die before they go into captivity, and of the third who goes into captivity, only 10% will survive until the end of the tribulation period after that, when Jesus Christ returns. So we're looking at a catastrophe of proportions that it is hard to even fathom. It says that the cities are going to have laid waste, the land is going to be desolate, that destruction will be everywhere. Isaiah 27 verse 13 says, "It shall come to pass in that day that the great trumpet shall be blown." It signals the return of Jesus Christ and the resurrection of those who are Christ at His coming. "And they shall come which were ready to perish in the land of Assyria, and the outcasts in the land of Egypt, and shall worship the Eternal in the holy mount at Jerusalem." So it's going to signal a return to that remnant of the house of Israel that has survived this time period, that time period that is ahead. In Jeremiah chapter 16 and verse 14, God, focusing on that time period, yet future, inspired Jeremiah to write in Jeremiah 16:14, "Therefore, behold, the days come, says the Lord, that it shall no more be said, the Lord lives that brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt, but the Eternal lives that brought up the children of Israel from the land of the north. and from all the lands where he has driven them, and I will bring them again into their land that I gave unto their fathers. Behold, I will send for many fishers, says the Lord, and they shall fish them. And after will I send for many hunters, and they shall hunt them from every mountain and from every hill and out of the holes of the rocks. For mine eyes are upon all their ways, and they are not hid from my face, neither is their iniquity hid from my eyes. And first I will recompense their iniquity and their sin double, because they've defiled my land, and have filled my heritage with the carcasses of their detestable and abominable things. O Lord, my strength and my fortress, my refuge in the day of afflictions, the Gentiles shall come unto you from the ends of the earth, and shall say, Surely our fathers have inherited lies, vanity, and things wherein is no profit. Now, what's going to transpire? There's going to be a regathering when the trumpet is blown and when Jesus Christ sets his hand to save this world. There's going to be a regathering. He's going to start by regathering the remnant of Israel, the remnant of the house of Israel, probably numbering only 8 to 10 million people. Just a fraction of our present population. This is not just the United States. This is including, of course, all of Israel, which would include Canada and Britain, Australia, New Zealand, portions of South Africa, would include portions of northwestern Europe, of France and the Benelux nations, Scandinavia, that portion there that represents the descendants, as well as, of course, the house of Judah, as well as the Jews, who some of whom are presently in the nation in the Middle East that calls itself Israel, as well as others who are scattered throughout the rest of the world, representing, of course, only one of the tribes of Israel, the tribe of Judah. But all 12 of the tribes, the remnant that survive, is going to be regathered. And in some cases, God is going to have to send out people that, in effect, are going to be like fishers and hunters. They're going out to hunt for them. Because you're going to have people hidden away, trying to escape from all of the calamities that will have occurred. So we're going to begin regathering them. Jeremiah talked about that the bringing of Israel back to the promised land, back to the homeland of Israel there in the Middle East, will actually pale into insignificance the exodus from Egypt so many centuries ago. It will far overshadow that exodus. It will be such a vaster and greater exodus that people won't really speak of the God who brought Israel out of Egypt. They will speak of the God who brought Israel back from the land of her captivity. Why will it overshadow? Well, for one thing, it's going to involve a much greater number of people. The exodus those who came out of Egypt numbered 600,000 families, about perhaps 2 to 3 million people. This will number at least 3 times that size. 3 to 4 times the size of the original Exodus. So we're looking at a larger number of people. We're looking at even greater miracles that will occur. We're looking at a tremendous event that from the depths of total, absolute hopelessness, God will bring forth His people. We have an opportunity to be a part of that. We're told that in Matthew 24:14 that the gospel is being preached to the world as a witness right now. We're proclaiming a message of hope to the world. We're told on further down in Matthew 24 that when Jesus Christ returns, the elect are going to be gathered together with Him to meet Him there over Jerusalem. We're told in the book of Revelation and other places that we're going to rule and reign with Him for 1,000 years. We're going to reign on the earth as kings and priests administering God's government. Now, what are we going to do? Is God just going to have mass confusion? Bringing back, can you imagine bringing in 8 to 10 million people, refugees who have survived 3.5 years of the most horrible existence that is imaginable? They have gone through disease and privation of every basic human need. They are, in effect, the living dead. And they began to be brought back. They're disoriented. They don't know what's going on, where they're going, what's going on, who all these people are, what is transpiring. Well, they're going to have several things. One is, we're told in other scriptures that they will have known that there was a prophet among them, because they will have heard the message and are hearing the message that is going out right now. Most disregard it and are going about and pursuing their own activities. But the time is going to come when these events transpire, they will know there's been a prophet among them. And they will at least have a certain hope of what lies ahead. And as we began to regather them and to bring them back, what are we going to do? How are we going to deal with this number of people? Where are we going to put them? Remember, everything will be devastated. One of the things that is interesting, God is a practical God, and there are things that have to be dealt with. You're going to have a group of people that will be larger than the number of people that God brought out of Egypt. They're going to have to be housed. They're going to have to be clothed. They're going to have to be fed. Now, those are basic needs. We're not told the specific answers, but one of the things we're told is right prior to their return, at the time that Jesus Christ returns to this earth, and right prior to their being brought back, what's He going to do? Well, He's going to destroy a vast army that will have come up against Jerusalem, that will number many millions. Do you think that perhaps we might take the things that are left over? Armies, normally travel, and they've got certain provisions. They've got tents. They've got all kinds of things. I have an idea that we're going to pale the campgrounds at Big Sandy into insignificance for that first Feast of Tabernacles. Because if you think about it, the Feast of Trumpets pictures the return of Jesus Christ. That gives you 2 weeks to gear up for the Feast of Tabernacles. You think that's going to be a busy 2 weeks? You start bringing people back. And what are they going to be dwelling in? Well, they're going to be dwelling in tabernacles. Can you think of a better way to start off the millennium? The Feast of Tabernacles pictures the millennium. A better way to picture that than having them, setting up some kind of vast tent city there. But it's going to have to be organized. And undoubtedly it's going to be organized the way God inspired Moses to organize ancient Israel when He began bringing them out of Egypt. He set up and He organized them based on a system of captains. System that we utilize at God's Feast of Tabernacles to this day. He set up captains of 10, and He had an individual responsible for being captain over 10 families. And then that individual answered to someone over him who was a captain of 50. And he answered to someone over him who was a captain of 100. And he answered to someone over him who was a captain of 1,000. So there was an organized system. Well, undoubtedly, that's what God is going to do. We're going to begin to organize them. We're going to have to deal with them. They're going to have to be taught. They're going to have to be instructed. They're going to have to be healed. They're going to have to be clothed. They're going to have to be fed. What better time to start orientation into what is the world tomorrow all about than at the Feast of Tabernacles? What more appropriate time than to stand up on the first night of the evening service that begins the Feast of Tabernacles and to ask the question, why are we here? And there are going to be a lot of people. There are going to be millions of people sitting out there shaking their heads wanting to know the answer to that question. We will have their undivided attention. They will desperately want to know why they are here. But you realize how that relates to us? If there are 8 to 10 million people coming back, that means that of the 12 tribes of Israel, there will be about 3 million families. That means there'd be a need for about 300,000 captains of 10. You ever think about it like that? There would be a need for about 60,000 captains of 50. About 30,000 captains of 100. About 3,000 captains of 1,000. Perhaps we'll even have captains of 10,000. Have to go up a notch, be more people. About 300 of those. We know that there's going to be one of the apostles over each of the tribes of Israel. King David is going to be over all of them. The Bible lays that out. So we're going to be set up. We're going to be established. There's going to be an instant organizational structure. It's going to involve us. That's going to be our first assignment. What's the first thing you're going to do? Well, you're going to have a chance to serve at the Feast of Tabernacles, aren't you? You're going to have a chance to serve those individuals who've been brought back, to set up there and to provide them housing. How are we going to feed them? Well, I don't know. God fed ancient Israel manna when they came out of the wilderness because there wasn't anything there that they could physically provide for themselves. Perhaps that's what we're going to do. The clothes they had didn't wear out. God performed another miracle. Maybe that's what we're going to do at the very beginning. They're going to have to be oriented during that first Feast of Tabernacles as they began to enjoy an abundant meal. And I think when you look at the picture and you realize that everything is destroyed, the only way that God could feed them is by a miracle. Probably to produce manna the same way that He did at the original Exodus, and to feed them and to begin to work with them, to teach them, to instruct them. And then in the conclusion of that period of time, as we have dealt with them and intensively instructed them, as miracles of healing have been performed, there will come a matter of the first that's top on the agenda, a matter of reorganizing society. Because we're not just going to stay there dwelling in tents and set up in a kind of a camping situation for 1,000 years. That's simply a starting point. Now, obviously, we're going to start out with instruction. You can't instruct everybody, everything all at once. The basic instruction that God is going to give is spoken in Leviticus 19 and verse 2, when God began to instruct ancient Israel. The first instruction that He gave them, He says, "You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." The job of the priesthood was to teach the people the difference between the holy and the unholy, the clean and the unclean. So God is going to start out by instructing this group of about 3 million families. He's going to start out by instructing them, and we're going to be there to instruct our 10 families, or our 50 families, or our 100 families, whatever we have been assigned. We're going to start out, you see, on a small scale. At the beginning of the millennium, the population will grow and will increase, and our responsibilities will increase. We'll start out on a very small scale, right there in the land of Israel, dealing with perhaps only 10 families, or 50 families, or 100 families. We're going to start out by instructing them, you must be holy, for God is holy. You haven't understood about what it is to be holy and to be clean. Where are you going to start it? What are you going to teach them about it first? Well, the first thing, Leviticus 19:3. When you start out instructing the people to be holy, how did God start out? He started out with the basics, right here in Leviticus 19:3. You shall fear every man his mother and his father, and keep my Sabbaths. I am the eternal your God. So He started out with instruction, 1, about the family unit, 2, about God's Sabbath. So you start out by orienting people toward a proper family structure, by explaining to them the way the family ought to be, and begin to explain and expound God's laws that relate to the family. And right along with that, you start out by instructing them concerning God's Sabbaths, His weekly Sabbath and His annual holy days, because this orients you to understanding who God is and to understanding God's plan and purpose. And so that's where we start out, by instructions concerning the family and instructions concerning God's Sabbath and His holy days, beginning to instruct them and to orient them in what is basic and fundamental to establishing society. The family unit is the most fundamental building block of society. So we have to start out by instructions that relate to the family, how to have a right and a stable family, and the right kind of structure and government in the home, the right kind of structure in the family relationship. And right along with that, we have to start out by an introduction to the true God, His plan and purpose as pictured in His Sabbath and holy days. We proceed on from there to begin then the same thing that Joshua did when Israel came in and he gave into the promised land and he gave them rest. The land was divided up, an allotment for each tribe. And then the allotment for each tribe was further broken down for each basic family or clan within that tribe. And then for each household within that clan or family, to where everyone was given an inheritance, was given a portion of land. So there was an inheritance. Then people were allowed to settle their inheritance, and they began to build their homes, and began to build up their farms, because that's the basis. Agriculture is the basis of the economy. That's a starting point. But that's going to involve, even in itself, great miracles that are going to have to occur. Because we read in Revelation 16:3 that when the seven angels poured out the last seven vials, that the what are called the seven last plagues here, that the third of these poured out right at the return of Jesus Christ. Revelation 16:3, the second of these vials. The second angel poured out his vial upon the sea, and it became as the blood of a dead man, and every living soul died in the sea. And the third angel poured out his vial upon the rivers and fountains of water, and they became blood. So all of the water was turned to blood. Now, you can't live very long when that's the situation. All the sea life died. What's going to happen? How's that going to be remedied? Well, let's notice in Zechariah 14. Let's understand that's going to happen when the seven last plagues are poured out, the day that Jesus Christ returns. What's going to happen immediately after that? Well, in Zechariah 14:4, we find that His feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives. And the mount is going to cleave in two. And there will be a great valley there. And in verse 8 we learn, it shall be in that day that living waters shall go out from Jerusalem, half of them toward the former sea, and half of them toward the hinder sea. The former sea, or the eastern sea, which would be the Dead Sea, and the hinder sea, which would be the western sea, the Mediterranean Sea. In summer and winter shall it be, and the Lord shall be king over all the earth. So there's going to come, as the mount cleaves in two, and a spring of water springs up and begins to flow out. Half of it toward the Dead Sea, half of it toward the Mediterranean. Now, what's going to be the result of that stream of water that breaks forth after Jesus Christ returns? Well, in Ezekiel 47, verse 1, afterward he brought me again into the door of the house, and behold, waters issued from under the threshold of the house eastward. For the forefront of the house stood toward the east, and the water came down from under the right side of the house at the south side of the altar. And he showed me here, and the waters ran on, verse 2, and he saw this river, and he began measuring it, this river of living waters, and there were trees that sprung up along this river in verse 7. In verse 8 he said, these waters issue outward, out toward the east country, and go down into the desert, and go into the sea, which being brought forth into the sea, the waters shall be healed. And it'll come to pass that everything that lives, which moves, whithersoever the rivers come, shall live. And there shall be a great multitude of fish, because these waters shall come hither, and they shall be healed. Everything shall live whither the river comes. So what's going to happen? Well, waters, living waters, are going to break forth, and as they come in contact, as they flow out, everything they come in contact with is healed. And the fish and everything is going to be revived, and the waters are going to miraculously be cleared up. God is going to perform a miracle, and this is going to take place over a period of time. And as these waters flow, and as they touch other waters, and as it will literally spread all around the world. So there begins a restoration begins to take place. Isaiah 35 talks about that. in terms of other miracles that Jesus Christ is going to perform at His return. Isaiah 35 verse 1, the wilderness and the solitary place shall be glad for them. The desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose. It'll blossom abundantly. In verse 3, strengthen you the weak hands, confirm the feeble knees. Say to them that are of a fearful heart, be strong, fear not. Behold, your God shall come with vengeance. Even God with recompense, He will come and save you. The eyes of the blind shall be opened. The ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. The lame man shall leap as a hart. The tongue of the dumb shall sing. In the wilderness shall waters break out, and streams in the desert. The parched ground will become a pool, thirsty land, springs of water. So we're going to find a healing that takes place, a healing and restoration of the land. Deserts will begin to blossom forth as water comes forth. Living waters. And of course, God uses water in the Scripture as a symbol of His Holy Spirit. So He's going to start out, and physically water is going to be the first thing that's going to be restored. Clean, pure water. Water that will have life-giving properties. That will serve as a physical symbol of what God's Holy Spirit can do, just as water, clean, pure water, can regenerate an otherwise barren land. So God's Holy Spirit can rejuvenate, can regenerate an otherwise barren human life. So God begins by performing this miracle, regathering the remnant of Israel, bringing them back, beginning to orient them there at that Feast of Tabernacles to perform miracles to feed them. This miracle of water is performed, and the waters begin to flow out, and as it comes in contact, the waters of the sea are miraculously healed or changed. Fish and other life forms in the sea are miraculously restored to life. It begins to come up water in desert areas. There is a restoration of the land that begins. Now, does this instantly solve all the problems? Well, no. Because this is only a starting point there in the land of Israel as Jesus Christ has regathered the remnants of the 12 tribes. That's where He starts. That's not where He stops, but that is, Israel is the first fruits of is the first fruits unto the Lord, the beginning of His increase, the first fruits of His increase. So this is where He starts. Now, we find in the book of Ezekiel that problems are going to result, because within a matter of a time, after the Feast of Tabernacles, as land begins to be apportioned out and allocated out, and crops began to be sown, and then began to come up, and by perhaps the spring, certain crops then began to be harvested. As the time of the first fruits harvest begins, in that time period of the spring, and people are beginning to gather in crops and begin to have food once again that they're able to provide. They began to build homes, began to do various things, that within a short period of time, within a matter of just even a couple of years, here is an area that is beginning to prosper. Realize that the whole world is in a desolate condition and is waiting to be brought under the government of God. So we find described in the book of Ezekiel, it describes here in Ezekiel chapter 36, in verse 26, or verse 24, I will take you from among the heathen and gather you out of all the countries, bring you into your own land. I'll sprinkle clean water upon you, and you shall be clean from all your filthiness. From all your idols will I cleanse you. A new heart also will I give you, and a new spirit will I put within you. And I'll take away the stony heart out of your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes and keep my judgments, and you shall do them. And you shall dwell in the land that I gave to your fathers, and you shall be my people, and I will be your God. So as we began working with them and dealing with them and teaching them and instructing them, particularly during the first 3.5 years of the millennium, because when you go back to the book of Daniel, we find that Jesus Christ was cut off in the midst of a week. In the 70 weeks prophecy of Daniel, He was cut off in the midst of that after that 69th week, in the midst of that 70th week that has not yet been completed. So there's 3.5 years of his ministry yet to complete, which will undoubtedly be the first 3.5 years of the millennium, as he is ministering to Israel, instructing us and teaching us how to administer his government, just as he did the apostles. For 3.5 years, we're going to have been born into the family of God by that time, but we'll have at least that period of time right there in Jerusalem, or right there in the land of Israel, directly under Jesus Christ, and administering his government on a very localized scale. By the end of that period of time, the land of Israel will be blossoming and budding. The crops and large harvests that will have come in, will begin to be a land of plenty. Repair work will have occurred, and the land will be blossoming forth and beginning to really take on a beautiful, verdant look. During that period of time, as he is ministered directly, and our working under him, ministering directly to those people, many of them will have come to a point of conversion, will have God's Holy Spirit. And so we read in verse 33 of Ezekiel 36, "Thus says the Lord God, in that day I shall have cleansed you from all your iniquities, that I'll cause you to dwell in the cities, and the waste shall be builded. The desolate land shall be tilled, whereas it lay desolate in the sight of all that passed by. They shall say, this land that was desolate has become like the Garden of Eden." In verse 36, the heathen that are left round about, you shall know that I, the Eternal, have built the ruined places. Plant that was desolate, and I, the Lord, have spoken it, and I'll do it. Now, as we continue on down in chapter 38, we find in verse 8, "After many days you shall be visited in the latter years. You shall come into the land." This is speaking here to Gog and Magog and the eastern or oriental grouping of peoples. In this time period, just a few years into the millennium. Verse 8, "After many days you shall be visited in the latter years. You shall come back into the land that is brought back from the sword, and is gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel, which have been always waste, but it is brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely, all of them." So here is Israel, having been regathered, the land beginning to blossom forth. Here now are peoples in the east, whose area is still desolate, that began to hear about this and think. And let's notice what they began to think. Verse 10, "At the same time things shall come into your mind, and you shall think an evil thought. You shall say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I'll go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates." So what do we learn? We learn that locksmithing is not going to be a real thriving profession in the world tomorrow. Not going to be a need for it. Now, it's an important job today. You're a locksmith, and I know at least one individual that is. Well, that's fine, but the world tomorrow, you're not going to need that trade, because we're not going to have to lock things up. Now, that's going to look pretty defenseless, you see, as word begins to kind of filter out. Why, here's a group of people, they live in unwalled villages. They have no protection. They have no army. They have no soldiers. They have no weapons. There aren't any guns. They don't even have locks on the doors. They're sitting ducks. And they've got lots to eat, and they're prospering. And why don't we go down there and take what they have? So they began to get up, and they began to come. Verse 15, that they come out of the north parts, many of them riding upon horses, a great company, a mighty army, realizing that most of the technology has been devastated just a few years earlier in the valley of Jehoshaphat, when the modern technology of the armies was destroyed. So very possibly they will literally come on horses. It might be the only way they have of getting there, because much of the technology will have been destroyed, and the earth will be recovering from the effects of nuclear war and of devastation that will have occurred. They'll come up against my people Israel. a cloud to cover the land. And God is then going to deal with them. And He says in verse 22, I'll plead against him with pestilence and with blood. I'll rain upon him and upon his bands and upon the many people that are with them, an overflowing of rain, of great hailstones, fire, and brimstone. I'll magnify myself, sanctify myself, and I'll be known in the eyes of many nations, and they shall know that I am the Eternal. Those who hadn't gotten the point a little earlier. God is going to turn them back. He's going to only leave a sixth part of this army that's going to survive. In verse 2, He's going to send a fire, verse 6, upon Magog, and them that dwell carelessly in the isles. He'll make His holy name known in the midst of the people. And the heathen shall know that I am the Eternal, the Holy One in Israel, verse 7. See, God is going to introduce Himself to them now. He's going to let that handful survive so they can go back and tell everybody else what they saw. And God's government is going to begin expanding out from Israel all over the world. Notice verse 9. They that dwell in the cities of Israel shall go forth and set on fire and burn the weapons, both the shields and the bucklers and the bows and the arrows and the handstaves and the spears, and they shall burn them with fire 7 years. In other words, they're going to use it for firewood, and it's going to be over a 7-year period before all of this will have been completely used up. They won't take any wood out of the fields, neither cut down any of the forest, for they'll burn the weapons with fire, and they'll spoil those that spoil them, and rob those that rob them, says the Lord God. You have to understand the indication is this army is going to be an army that will number multiple millions, probably perhaps upward of 100 million people. So this army, it'll be 10 times as many of them as there will be even people of Israel there in the Middle East. So the things that they had with them will last these Israelites a long time. So the trees will have 7 years to really begin to really come back. We won't have to allow a reforestation project to really take root there. Just burn what was left behind when this army was wiped out. And it's actually going to take 7 months, verse 12, for the house of Israel to be burying them. There's going to be so many of them who have died that it's going to be a 7-month project just to bury them all. In verse 21, I'll set my glory among the heathen, and all the heathen shall see my judgment that I've executed, and my hand that I laid upon them, so the house of Israel shall know that I am the Eternal their God from that day forward. God is going to step in. He's going to fight Israel's battles. God's government begins to expand out over the earth. Let's notice in Isaiah 11. Isaiah 11, verse 1, there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, a branch shall grow out of his roots, the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, Spirit of wisdom and understanding, counsel, might, knowledge, and fear of the Lord. Make him of quick understanding in the fear of the Lord. He'll not judge after the sight of the eyes, nor reprove after the hearing of the ears. Not going to judge based on hearsay. He's going to judge righteous judgment. He's going to know, and he's going to deal righteously. With righteousness shall he judge the poor, and reprove with equity for the meek of the earth. He shall smite the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips shall he slay the wicked. So there's going to be problems to deal with. There are going to be those who are poor. There are going to be those who are wicked. There are going to be those who need to be dealt with, who need to be intervened for. And Christ is going to do that in those of us under Him. Righteousness shall be the girdle of His loins, faithfulness the girdle of His reins. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, the leopard shall lie down with the kid, the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, a little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear will feed, their young ones will lie down together, the lion will eat straw like an ox. A suckling child shall play on the hole of the asp, a weaned child will put his hand in the cockatrice den. So there's going to be a miracle performed that is going to affect even the animal realm. A miracle that will be performed that will transform even the nature of animals. It will serve to illustrate something. Verse 9, they shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. In that day there shall be a root of Jesse, which shall stand for an ensign of the people.
To it shall the Gentiles seek, and his rest shall be glorious. You see, God establishes his government there in Israel, and the Gentiles began to seek after it. To begin with, starting from Egypt and from Africa, indications in the book of Isaiah that this is some of the first part that's going to come, that there are going to be emissaries sent down from the areas of East Africa coming up to inquire and to ask someone to come and teach them. We find that those who were the captors, those who were the rulers and the concentration camp guards and those who were the oppressors of Israel are actually going to come back as servants and they're going to have a chance to learn to serve. They thought rulership and leadership was lording it over someone else and oppressing others. So they're going to have a chance to be servants, and they're going to learn how to serve. Probably on the indication of God's law, they might very well be servants there for a period of 50 years before the next generation would be granted their liberty and have a chance to be restored to their heritage. They're going to have to serve. Everyone has to learn how to serve. God is going to teach Israel how to serve because he's going to let us be the servants of a harsh taskmaster. But then those taskmasters are going to have to learn to serve also. So, an ensign or an insignia, a sign is going to be there that the nations are going to begin to seek to as Israel becomes a light to the world. And they see the results of God's way. They see an area of the world beginning to bloom and to blossom. And it'll come to pass, verse 11, in that day the Lord shall set his hand the second time to recover the remnant of his people. It shall be left from Assyria and Egypt and Pathros and all these areas. In verse 12, he will set up an ensign for the nations and shall assemble the outcast of Israel and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. The envy of Ephraim shall depart, and the adversaries of Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not vex Ephraim. You know, that type of animosity and things that you can trace all the way back to ancient Israel. We see it on down even in our time, going back to the time of the friction between Britain and the Jews at the time of Israeli independence, back in the 1940s, and all of the things that have gone on, and some of the friction that has been there and continues on down to this day, that's finally going to disappear. We're going to realize we're one people, one group of people. So God is going to begin this. There is a restoration that is going to occur. On in Micah chapter 4. Let's notice a little bit more. Micah 4, verse 1. In the last days it'll come to pass that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established in the top of the mountains. It'll be exalted above the hills, and people shall flow to it. God's government is going to be set up, and people are going to begin to come and to seek. Many nations shall come and say, "Come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways. We'll walk in his paths. The law shall go forth of Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem." So beginning from around the world, various people, starting with the neighbors of Israel, are going to begin to send up emissaries and are going to say, "We see that God is here. We see that this is the way, and we want what you have." In verse 3, He, Christ, shall judge among many people, rebuke strong nations afar off. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. So the teaching of war is going to be abolished. Violence is not going to fill the earth anymore. A miracle is going to be performed to remove violence from the animal world, and people are going to begin to learn how to dwell at peace and how to love their neighbor. They're going to begin to learn how to act on God's law. We start out regathering the remnant of Israel, beginning to teach and instruct them, and by the time 3.5 years has gone by, a society is beginning to flourish. Attackers come up. They are devastated. By this time, everybody's beginning to get the point. And they begin to come up and inquire and say, "Look, we're not coming here to try to take what you have. We just want you to teach us." so that we can have it too. And Christ then begins to send out various ones who are designated to go out into these areas and to establish His government there in Egypt and there in the areas around and in Germany and throughout Europe and going into Asia and going through around the world as the government of God begins to spread out. And He will rebuke strong nations afar off and begin to intervene and begin to teach and instruct. And the result of this, verse 4, they shall sit every man under his vine and under his fig tree. None shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken it. Now there's going to be private property. It's not going to be a communist state. Every man will sit under his vine and under his fig tree. Families are going to be given an inheritance to develop. It won't be the community fig tree or the community vine. Communism is not utopia, and that's not God's way of bringing it about. God is going to give to every family their allocation, their inheritance. He's going to have to heal the land, and then He's going to distribute it. Notice verse 5, all people will walk, everyone, in the name of his God, and we will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever. You understand the implication of that verse? What are we going to be? We're going to be born into the family of God. We're going to be born as sons of God at the resurrection. We're going to eventually be assigned out and given responsibility around the world. People are going to walk in the name of their God, the member of the God family, the Son of God that is their governor, their ruler, and all of us will walk in the name of the eternal our God. They're going to look to us, and we're going to look to God the Father and to Jesus Christ and point them toward God the Father and Jesus Christ. So God's government is going to be established. Now, there are various other things. Let's just note that some of the reforms, some of the things that are going to take place. In the book of Zephaniah, chapter 3 and verse 9, for then will I turn to the people a pure language, that they may all call upon the name of the Lord to serve Him with one consent. So the knowledge of God is going to cover the earth the way the waters cover the sea. The whole world is going to learn about the true God and His ways and His commandments. And God's going to give the people a pure language. So He's going to reverse what happened at the Tower of Babel. Now Satan has tried to create one world the wrong way by bringing together everyone. And if you go back to the Tower of Babel, God gave instructions that mankind was to the various families of mankind that gave rise to the different racial and ethnic groupings were to spread out around the world and to receive their inheritance, their allotment of the earth's bounty. And Nimrod, under the instigation of Satan, tried to convince people, look, you don't want to do what God wants you to do. Don't spread out. Let's all blend together right here. Let's create one world Satan's way. So God came down and said, all right, if you're not going to do what I want you to do voluntarily, I'll confound your languages and you won't have any alternative. You won't be able to understand each other. So He gave every ethnic group the various family groupings that were because every ethnic group is the outgrowth of a family. The family, the descendants of particular individuals, as are enumerated back in Genesis. So God gave to each one of those families a different language where they couldn't understand each other and they had to spread out. Now, under God's government, He's not going to bring them all together to build one city and have Babylon. Babylon is Satan's attempt at one world, and it's a confused attempt. But God is then going to restore one language. He's going to give them a basis where people can understand one another. And then He's going to reallocate and redivide the earth, because that's the way that God is ultimately going to solve the problems and the ethnic jealousies and rivalries and various problems. It's not an accident that there are different racial and ethnic groups on the earth. That's God's purpose. That's God's plan. That's a part of the very plan of God. It's not some accident of evolution or something of that sort. No, rather, we're told in Deuteronomy 32, verse 7, remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations, ask your father and he'll show you, your elders and they'll tell you, when the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance. When He separated the sons of Adam, He set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. So the earth is going to be reallocated. People are going to be given their inheritance, their portion of the earth. And as they begin to obey God, it's going to bloom and blossom. There's not going to be the jealousy and the rivalry and the hostility and people trying to look down on other people and filled with hatreds and jealousies and all types of rivalries. Everyone is going to be happy and thankful to develop the area that God has given them. And they're going to look to God's headquarters at Jerusalem. And they're going to want to be God's servants. And they're going to want to serve God. And they're going to want to look to God's headquarters and those through whom God is working there in the land of Israel, there in Jerusalem. And they're going to look there for leadership and for guidance. And there's going to be a structure flowing out from Jerusalem around the world. Now, what about some of these things? What about the weather? What is the weather going to be like? Can you know? Well, yeah. Let's notice a couple of verses. Leviticus 26, verse 4. God says, then will I give you rain in due season, and the land shall yield her increase, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit. So God is going to give us good weather. He's going to give rain in due season. Does that mean the whole earth will only have one climate? Will there be different seasons? You know, it says the answer to that is given in Genesis 8:22. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. So there are going to be seasons. There's nothing wrong with seasons. That's a part of God's plan. There's going to be a certain seasonal variation. The whole earth is not going to be identical. It's all going to blossom and bud, and God is going to bring certain mountains down, and He's going to raise certain valleys up. Not to make everything flat as a tabletop, but to make the entirety of the earth's surface usable to mankind. Deserts are going to blossom out and to bloom so that there can be plenty of food, that people are not going to be starving to death. The land will become productive. But there will certainly be seasonal variations, and there will be certain climactic variations, all within a scope of what is good and what is normal and what is productive and what's useful for human beings. Notice, what about cities? Are there going to be any cities in the world tomorrow? Or is everybody going to be a farmer? You ever wondered that? Maybe you think everybody is going to be a farmer. There won't be any cities. Well, no, that's not what God says. In Deuteronomy 28:3, He said, blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the field. So there are going to be blessings in the cities and blessings in the fields. Now, in order to have blessings in the cities, you have to have cities. Where are we going to get cities? Where are we going to have cities? Well, in Isaiah 58, in verse 12, they that shall be of you shall build the old waste places. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of paths to dwell in. So many of the cities are actually going to be rebuilt on the location of cities today. We're not going to come in and do a patchwork job on something that was built the wrong way to begin with. It will be destroyed. And so we will rebuild from scratch, building up on the areas of the old waste places. Many of today's cities are located at logical places. They're located on sea coasts. They're located along rivers. They're located in areas where logically people would tend to congregate. So we're going to begin to build those places back, but we're going to build them the right way. Now let's understand a little bit as to how that's going to be. In Isaiah 61:4, for instance, it says, they shall build the old waste, they shall raise up the former desolations, they shall repair the waste cities, the desolations of many generations. So we're going to repair and restore some of these areas. Well, what kind of cities are they going to be? How are we going to rebuild them? Are they going to be like today's megalopolises, where you've got people all crowded together and congested, and you've got horrible conditions in many areas of the city, where you've got freeways that are like parking lots? Isaiah 5 in verse 8, God says, "Woe unto them that join house to house, that lay field to field till there be no place, that they may be placed alone in the midst of the earth." You know, woe to them that join house to house. God doesn't want something that's so congested and so crowded up that nobody has room to turn around. A city doesn't have to be built that way in order to be a city. Notice Zechariah. Zechariah chapter 2, verse 4. And said unto them, Run, speak to this young man, saying, Jerusalem shall be inhabited as towns without walls, for the multitude of men and cattle therein. Realize there's going to be, instead of everybody being crowded into high-rise apartments and congested tenements, there's going to be space. People are going to have room. Even there will be a green belt around the city where cattle and farm animals will be able to be kept. There will be a situation where things will be a little more spread out. In Zechariah chapter 8, and verse 4. Thus says the Lord of hosts, There shall yet old men and old women dwell in the streets of Jerusalem, and every man with his staff in his hand for very age. So here are people who are elderly, who are going to be able to be out in the street. They're not going to be afraid of getting knocked in the head, getting run over. And the streets of the city shall be full of boys and girls playing in the streets thereof. It's not going to be dangerous and unsafe. There are not going to be people ripping and roaring down the streets, running over anybody within sight. Obviously, cities are going to be quite a bit different. All right, what about technology? Is there any place for technology in tomorrow's world? Now, we see that there are going to be cities, as well as fields, as well as farmers. What's going to be done in the cities? Is there any place for technology? Notice in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 8, verse 7. For the Lord your God brings you into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of mountains and depths that spring out of valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley and vines and fig trees and pomegranate, a land of oil, olive, and honey, a land wherein you shall eat bread without scarceness, you shall not lack anything in it, a land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills you may dig brass. Now, obviously, there's going to be a mining industry. Not strip mines that are going to devastate the face of the earth, but there's going to be a mining industry. Else why are the stones of iron and out of the hills you're going to dig brass? Well, there's going to be certain industry and technology, yes, but it's going to be structured God's way. It's going to be done in a right way. Going to be technological advances, but they're going to be handled in a proper way. Notice the book of Isaiah, chapter 60 and verse 5. Well, let's start in Isaiah 60, verse 1. Arise, shine, for your light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you. And behold, the darkness shall cover the earth, and gross darkness the people, but the Lord shall rise upon you, and His glory shall be seen upon you. So God pictures the earth as being in darkness prior to His return, a literal dark age. But then, as God's glory begins to illuminate Israel, here is a flicker of light. And the Gentiles shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising. So the other nations are going to then begin to come to Israel because they're going to see something that they haven't seen, they haven't understood. Lift up your eyes round about and see all that gather themselves together. They come to you. Your son shall come from far. Your daughter shall be nursed at your side. Then you shall see and flow together, your heart shall fear and be enlarged, because the abundance of the sea shall be converted unto you. The forces of the Gentiles, or the wealth of the Gentiles, shall come unto you. Now, that phrase, the abundance of the sea shall be converted unto you. You ever thought about the abundance of the sea? What's involved in there? You realize that just today, a portion, only a scratching of the surface of what's available from the sea. The Dow Chemical Company currently manufactures over 500 items from seawater. Now, 1 cubic mile of seawater stores over 175 million tons of dissolved chemicals, minerals, various things, worth about $5 billion. All kinds of minerals and things are right there dissolved in seawater. We just don't know how to get them all out and utilize them. It's estimated about $100 million worth of gold is contained in any cubic mile of seawater. We're going to be able to utilize some of those things. The abundance of the sea is going to be converted unto us. There are going to be technologies that we don't even fully realize today. We're going to be able to tap and to utilize things, the wealth and the things that God has put in this earth, but we're going to do it in a right way. You know, even transportation. And we're not told the details of transportation, but there's going to have to be a mass rapid transit system in the world tomorrow, and I can prove that because it says in Zechariah 14, verse 16, "It shall come to pass that everyone that is left of all the nations that came up against Jerusalem shall even go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. And it'll come to pass that whoso will not come of all the families of the earth unto Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, even upon them shall be no rain." Now the nations that came up against Jerusalem, well, we're told in verse 2 of Zechariah 14 that all nations are gathered against Jerusalem to battle. So all of them are going to be coming up to Jerusalem to worship God every year for the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, how long do you think it would take people from China to get there if they had to walk? People from South America, what are they going to do? Swim? How are they going to get over there? Well, obviously, there's going to have to be some kind of transportation system, isn't there? You can't take a year to get everybody. You wouldn't, if you had to paddle a canoe or walk, all you'd do is travel to and from the Feast of Tabernacles. In fact, you'd probably show up in the 8th month. You'd be late getting there. The horse threw a shoe. Or you got lame or whatever. Well, so we're not told exactly what we're going to have. We're not going to have some pollution producing system that is going to pollute and wreck the earth. But there are going to be technologies, there are going to be innovations that we can't even begin to imagine that are going to begin to be developed. Crafts and things of expertise and of skill, God's not against that. Notice in Exodus 35 and verse 30. Exodus 35 and verse 30. "Moses said unto the children of Israel, See, the Lord has called by name Bezaleel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and he has filled him with the Spirit of God in wisdom and understanding and in knowledge and in all manner of workmanship, to devise curious works, to work in gold and in silver and in brass and in the cutting of stones, to set them and in carving of wood, to make any manner of cunning wood. And he has put in his heart that he may teach, both he and Aholiab, the son of Ahisamach of the tribe of Dan, them is he filled with wisdom of heart, to work all manner of work of the engraver and of the cunning workman and of the embroiderer in blue and purple and scarlet and fine linen, to do all these things." And verse 1 of chapter 36, "Then they wrought every wise-hearted man in whom the Lord put wisdom and understanding, to know how to work all manner of work for the service of the sanctuary, according to all that the Lord has commanded." They're going to be skilled artisans. They're going to be high levels of craftsmanship. God is not the author of sloppy, slipshod ways of doing things, where something looks like some crude Stone Age implement put together. There's going to be a beauty and a glory to the temple and to Jerusalem and setting a pace that the whole world will be able to look to. A level of artisanship, of craftsmanship that's going to people whose natural abilities will be enhanced by the Spirit of God, enabling them to work superb craftsmanship that far excels anything that we know of. You know, there are going to be professional musicians and orchestras. That's God established that in His law. You find in 2 Chronicles 29, verse 25, He set the Levites in the house of the Lord with cymbals and psalteries and harps, according to the commandment of David. And they stood there with these instruments. And we find in verse 28, all the congregation worshipped, and the singers sang, and the trumpeters sounded, and all this continued until the burnt offering was finished. In verse 30, Hezekiah the king and the princes commanded the Levites to sing praise unto the Lord with the words of David and of Asaph the seer, and they sang praises with gladness. Now we find here that there was a professional Levitical orchestra and choir. A whole group of the tribe of Levi whose occupation was to perform on the very highest level of music. So there's going to be right music, a right use of the arts, a development of human creativity, of human ability. So there are many things that we find that are described that give us an insight into the mind of God and the way that God is going to develop society in the world tomorrow. Let's notice just a couple of things in closing here in 1 Kings. In chapter 4 of 1 Kings, in 1 Kings 4, verse 20, Judah and Israel were many, as the sand that is on the seashore in multitude, eating and drinking and making merry. And Solomon reigned over all the kingdoms from the river, that's the Euphrates, unto the land of the Philistines and unto the border of Egypt. And notice down in verse 24, he had dominion over all the region on this side the river, and he had peace on all sides round about him. Verse 25, and Judah and Israel dwelt safely, every man under his vine and under his fig tree, all the days of Solomon. Now that phrase, under his own vine and under his own fig tree, is only used in Isaiah and Micah to refer to and to describe the world tomorrow. Solomon's reign typified the world tomorrow. Typified a time of peace and prosperity. Was a type of what was going to come. Solomon's name meant peace. So notice a little bit about Solomon's reign. Since Solomon's reign typified this, certainly at the beginning it did. Verse 29, God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding exceeding much. Largeness of heart, even as the sand that's on the seashore. Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the children of the east country and all the wisdom of Egypt. He was wiser than all men. Verse 32, he spoke 3,000 proverbs. His songs were 1,005. He spoke of trees, from the cedar tree that's in Lebanon to the hyssop that springs out of the wall. He spoke of beasts and of fowl, of creeping things and of fish. And there came all people to hear the wisdom of Solomon from all the kings of the earth that heard his wisdom. Now what's the point? Well, is God against scientific inquiry? Is God against the acquisition and right use of knowledge? No, God blessed Solomon with wisdom and insight. Solomon devoted a lot of his time to studying various subjects, to studying about all kinds of things, about plants and farming and agriculture. He learned about, he studied biology, he studied agronomy, he studied zoology, he studied all kinds of things. He investigated and learned a lot of things. God's not against that. God is not against the right use and development of knowledge. We find, for instance, in 1 Kings chapter 10, we find about the trade that took place, the trading that Solomon was engaged in, and the great navy that he built. You know, those things can be done in a right way as people all over the earth have contact with one another in a right way. And various products and various things come there to Jerusalem, God's headquarters. And as there are certain things that are developed in a right way. Oh, God tells us in Proverbs 25, verses 2 and 3, it's the glory of God to conceal a thing and the honor of kings to search it out. For man to develop his ability to develop his mind, to learn about the glories that God has designed, the creation, whether it's the universe or whether it's the earth under his feet. Those things are right and good. They have their place in a right society. We're not going to see a bogging down and a stagnation in the world tomorrow. We're going to see a development and a flowering and a blooming and a budding that is beyond our comprehension. But it's going to be done in accordance with God's law. Our first priority is going to be walking in the ways of God and developing a society that reflects God's values. And as a result, there's going to be peace, there's going to be happiness, there's going to be tranquility, there's going to be 1,000 years of the government of God growing and expanding and developing. And brethren, we have a part in bringing that about, a very real and literal part. Those of us who are converted and who will be therefore changed and transformed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the return of Jesus Christ, ruling there under Christ as kings and priests, bringing about this transformation of the earth and this development that will occur during 1,000 years. Those of our children who are younger, who are still who've not yet been converted, who are simply human beings living out their life and yet oriented toward God's way, are going to be physical leaders. Perhaps some of them will be right there as maybe even starting out with the, we're going to need captains of 10, we're going to need various things, starting out, organizing. When Israel begins to be regathered, they're going to have a function. They're going to have an opportunity to live out a productive life, to explore and to be a part in pioneering an entirely new and different society that has vistas and horizons that rise so far above the things that we get bogged down in here and now that it just pales into insignificance. We could go through things about trade, about commerce, about God's laws, even dealing with finance. There are going to be all kinds of things, all kinds of vistas and horizons that are out before us for the development of an entirely new society, a society that is based on God's laws. And we have an opportunity to be a part of bringing that about. Now, in order to be there and to be a part of that, we have to first be transformed in our thinking to where we're committed to the values of God's society, not the values of this world which is passing away. And by orienting our lives and our thinking toward God and walking with God and serving God and allowing Jesus Christ to live His life in us, we have the opportunity of ultimately being born into the very family of God, of being a part of reshaping an entire world. Brethren, it's so great, and our future that is out before us is so fantastic that there is nothing with which to compare it. That's what God offers us. This is just a glimpse of what God holds out to us. Let us rededicate our efforts. Realize that whatever problem, whatever difficulty and trauma we face today is not even worthy to be compared to the glory that shall be revealed in us if we endure to the end.